So good afternoon, good morning, or good evening to you, depending where you are in the ICEAA world. Thank you for joining us for our second of the 2026 ICEAA Cost Challenge presentations. This year, we asked our junior estimators to figure out the cost of establishing, sustaining, and growing a human settlement on Mars. The teams were given about 2 weeks to work through the challenge and presented them to our judges at the ICEAA workshop back in May in Norfolk, Virginia. And we've got one of our teams today, the group from Tecolote, so I'm going to let them take it away. We'll probably start with Jeff Zoo. Jeff?
Hi, it's actually Abby,
Oh,
but
okay.
good afternoon, everyone. We are Tecolote Research's 2026 ICEA Cost Challenge team. We're super excited to be here today and thankful to everyone taking the time to listen. Our project asks a fundamental question: what would it cost to establish and sustain a permanent human settlement on Mars? Specifically, we developed a 10 Mars year whole life cost estimate for a scalable settlement located in Arcadia, Planitia, beginning in FY 2050. Our estimate includes the transportation architecture, surface infrastructure, life support and crew systems, and long term sustainment required to grow and maintain a permanent human presence on Mars. Throughout this presentation, we'll walk through our methodology, assumptions, system architecture, cost results, and key uncertainties associated with building New Jamestown. This is a fundamentally different problem than a short term mission. We're dealing with an extreme environment, long supply chains, and no real rescue options. So, our goal was to build a defensible 10-year cost model and define the full system needed to sustain and grow a permanent settlement, with the intention of New Jamestown continuing past 2069. You may ask yourself, why spend all this money to go to Mars in the first place? There are six main reasons that we researched, one being planetary backup, two being scientific exploration, three being technological advancement, four being inspiration and education. We all saw how Artemis II brought together US as a nation in this past April. Five being economic opportunities. Companies such as SpaceX are already capitalizing off of space exploration. And lastly, six is international collaboration and peace. This slide provides a clear financial picture. The total program cost is $292 billion, but the most critical insight here is the breakdown. The chart on the right gives us total cost by top level WVS element, and there's a crucial story here. Over half of the entire budget, nearly 57%, is dedicated to operations and sustainment. This tells us the biggest cost isn't just getting there, but staying and operating long term. What's really striking is when you look at the other end of the scale. The transportation system to get there is less than 5% of the cost due to the reusable nature of the launch system. And the core science and technology system is a very small fraction at just 0.2% due to the exclusion of most R&D previously accrued costs. The key takeaway is that our primary financial challenge is the long-term sustainment and continuation of New Jamestown.
I'm Jeffrey Zhu.
I'm Claire Dana.
I'm Jake Garcia.
And I'm Abby Marler, and our mentor was Megan McDonald. And collectively, when we presented this at ICEAA, we had 3.17 Earth years and 1.68 Martian years of cost estimating experience.
Okay, this is the problem. To begin working on this estimate, we had to establish our methodology, and we followed the Tecolote 14-step cost estimating process, which closely aligns with and was used to help develop the GAO 12-step process. You'll see this process throughout the slides, so we will just be briefly covering these phases. First of all, we reviewed the prompt, identified the project scope, and established ground rules in phase 1. We created our initial WBS, researched and collected data in phase 2. We developed our ACE model and decided on cost methodologies for phase 3, then developed our point estimate and applied risk and uncertainty for phase 4. And then finally, we documented, which became this PowerPoint for phase 5. For our ground rules and assumptions, research and development was excluded. We focused only on procurement and operations and sustainment costs. I'll go more into that and why in a minute. We used a parametric approach with historical analogies, then scaled costs by factors like quantity, mass, and complexity. We also adjusted costs for inflation using NASA's NNSI index. The risk and uncertainty we used log normal distribution for more complex costs that involved future technologies, and a triangle distribution for more straightforward costs. We reported results at an 80% confidence level as done by NASA. We also applied an 80% learning curve where repeated production occurred for current high-cost experimental technologies. And because this estimate takes place 24 years in the future, we assume that developing technologies like rocketry, robotics, autonomous systems, nuclear power, and life support would work as projected and advertised. And we're also using the Darien calendar and 10 Martian years instead of 10 Earth years. We assumed robotics would be sophisticated enough for independent construction and maintaining infrastructure, so manpower was excluded. And we assumed our maximum possible population will not exceed 550 colonists, and accounted for that with our life support systems. Finally, we accounted for a 6-month-long Mars transit time and launch opportunities every 26 months. Okay, this slide shows our launch schedule. We are planning for 8 launch windows every 26 months. We'll be launching between 1 and 4 rockets every window, depending on cargo needs for the current phase of the mission. The initial launch will send supplies for habitat and autonomous systems to establish the initial infrastructure, followed by a mix of crew and cargo launches in order to achieve our end goal of self-sustainment. Now, for our reasoning behind picking this launch schedule, number one, we are limited by the home and transfer windows, which are periods where the Earth's orbit is nearing closest approach to Mars. Because of the limitations of chemical rockets and human anatomy, we need to minimize the distance traveled and time taken in transit. This gives us just under a month-long period where we can launch every 26 months. And number two, the planned method for the Starship to have enough fuel for an interplanetary mission is to use up to 10 separate refueling rockets. If we wanted to send 10 rockets to Mars, we'd end up having to do over 100 launches all in under a month. To have a realistic estimate, we chose to keep our launches limited and bring what is necessary for our colony. Because we're using Martian years, we decided to use a Martian calendar. The Darien calendar is one of the proposed timekeeping systems for potential Martian settlers. It contains 24 months or sols instead of 12, and 1 Martian year is about 1.88 Earth years. This slide shows the conversion for Martian years and Earth years. As stated earlier in our project timeline, this covers 10 whole Martian years. It begins at the beginning of the 2050 fiscal year, and this puts our mission end date on July 23rd, 2068, or in the Darien calendar, that would be Kumba 15th. Now, with such an open-ended prompt, we had to exclude a lot to complete our estimate in the allotted time. The biggest exclusion was research and development and any pre-2050 technological development. Even with our extended timeline, it would have been extremely unrealistic to include research and development phase and still have a fully self-sustaining colony in 10 years. If we wanted to consider research and development before our launch phase, how many years would we have to go back for all the developing technologies? We also excluded the broader Earth-based industrial costs beyond launch operations. The political, regulatory, and governance costs were not accounted for. Mission failure or any catastrophic system failures were not considered. There were no commercial revenue offsets. We left out end-of-life disposal and decommissioning costs because of the goal of this becoming an ongoing self-sustaining colony. Finally, because the concept assumes a highly autonomous colony with robotics and AI support, direct manpower costs were excluded. So now what remains in the scope are transportation logistics, surface infrastructure, life support and in situ resource utilization, crew and operations, and science and expansion systems. And we will go more over these in depth throughout our slides. Our chosen location for New Jamestown is the Arcadia Planitia, And this is in the northern hemisphere with a latitude that ranges from 35 to 55 degrees. This landing location was chosen because of its access to key resources such as subsurface water ice. Also, its relatively flat terrain makes it an easy landing location and has a relatively low elevation. It is also NASA's current primary landing site for any upcoming manned Mars mission.
All right, now that we've heard a little bit about the problem, let's talk about our solution. So before we can create a comprehensive cost model, we of course have to have some data. So this is our data mining slide. We tried as much as possible to stick to primary sources. We took a lot from the NASA Technical Report Server, NASA publications and articles, as well as program data from the ISS and publicly available data from commercial space companies such as SpaceX and Sierra Space. We also used CERs from the IDA, which is the Institute for Defense Analyses, for some of our communication systems. However, we did run into a couple of places where we needed data or we were trying to build something that didn't have a space-specific existing product. So in those cases, we drew analogies from terrestrial sources. Mostly this was industrial plants. We also applied an 80% learning curve on everything that was mass-produced, as mentioned before. All of our costs are normalized to CY 2026, and we applied the NASA New Start inflation indices for all of our escalation. New Start is what NASA uses when they are trying to build a completely new project that nobody's ever done before, which of course a Mars colony would be. This is our WBS structure. Right now it has 8 sections. They were mentioned above, and this only goes down to the level 2 WBS, but it does go a little further. Our WBS is, of course, super important for defining and creating a very comprehensive and replicable cost estimate, so we tried to stick to this as much as possible. This slide you've kind of seen before. It's our total whole life cost. It's $292.44 billion over the entire 10 Martian years, or approximately 18 Earth years. Again, normalized to constant year 2026. Our operations and sustainment system is the highest, most expensive system, but that is followed closely by surface habitat and infrastructure, and then things like crew and human systems and program integration. Here we have a graph of our whole life cost over time. The colors are WBS elements, and this goes from Mars year 234 to 244. As you can see, we have a high startup cost in 234 with some very beginning of life early program costs, and then it dips down in 235 and 236. 235 and 236 are the years on Mars where we don't have any humans, so that is to be expected because we're not actually sustaining life. We just have our robots on Mars creating our system and making it habitable. And then once the humans start arriving, our costs seem to grow a little bit up to 244, which is our most expensive year. And then if you'll notice that, or 244, my bad, is a very low cost. That is not because our costs dip down at the end. It is because 244 is not a fully estimated year. Because we started our 10 years at fiscal year 2050 or October 1, 2049 in Earth years, 234 and 244 are not exactly a full year on Mars. And so 244 is actually only estimating about 160 days. If we were to estimate the full Martian year 244, we expect that it would have a high cost like year 243 and 242. These are our top 10 cost drivers. Our top cost driver is emergency detection systems, followed by evacuation systems, and then a little bit farther down, we have preventative maintenance. So, of course, keeping people alive, making sure that nothing bad happens, that's a high priority for us. Our second category of high cost drivers is hardware modifications, preventative maintenance, power maintenance, and construction, which, of course, the cost to build and sustain our system is important. And then a little bit lower on our cost driver list, we have things like ground systems and our life habitats that are just pieces of our WBS. Here we have a convergence chart. It was calculated at 10,000 iterations, and we noticed that it converges at the 2,000 iteration mark. So when you see all of our risk later, all of our risk was run with 2,000 iterations.
This is our system architecture. Our estimate covers from launch to an established colony. The architecture of our mission allows us to return samples and crew to the Earth while also achieving self-sustainment, one of the major goals set by our prompt. Now, transportation was our first WBS. Let's start with the total cost. The total launch vehicle cost came out to around $12 billion, and the life support systems were about $2 billion, totaling $14.2 billion. And surprisingly, transportation only consisted of 4.8% of the program total. Now, for the launch vehicle, we use the SpaceX Starship as the main transportation system. Starship consists of the Super Heavy booster and the Starship upper stage. We are using 3 variants, one for crew, one for cargo, and one for refueling. Each Starship launch requires 10 separate launches to refuel in low Earth orbit. And this is all based off of the SpaceX's Mars mission plans. Now, because detailed SpaceX cost data is not publicly available, we used an analogous estimating approach for the Starship full stack, which includes the Super Heavy booster and the Starship. We used a third-party estimate that came out to around 90 million per launch. With our assumption of future systems working as advertised, the significant reusability led to extremely cheap launch costs. Now, for refurbishment, it was estimated separately using Falcon 9 refurbishment costs, then adjusted by size and engine count. For ground systems and operations, we used Artemis 2's reported 568 million per year as a proxy, which was actually transportation's biggest cost driver. Our life support systems were based on well-tested technology used on the ISS. We're bringing our own food, water, and air, basing the required amounts on NASA's technical reports on astronaut metabolic mass balance and scaling by crew size. Also, all of this is being recycled through the Environmental Control and Life Support System, or ECLSS, which is estimated to be about 175 million per unit.
All right. Our second WBS element was surface infrastructure. That consists of habitat modules, a nuclear power system, and a communication system. In total, that came to about $56 billion, which is just under 20% of our program total. Our habitat modules are based off of the Sierra Space Life System, which is an inflatable habitat that is currently in consideration for the orbital reef. If anybody doesn't know, the orbital reef is what will be replacing the ISS, International Space Station, when it retires in the future. We used cost actuals from the actual Sierra Space Life Habitat prototypes, and we scaled them up for population size, so all of our inputs are real data. For a nuclear power system, we had to use a terrestrial nuclear plant because unfortunately nobody's really done large-scale nuclear power on Mars yet, but they're working on it. Our plant will be constructed entirely on Mars using ISRU-produced concrete and steel. All of our inputs for nuclear power plant cost and sizing are from the World Nuclear Association, and construction and maintenance costs are included in that. Finally, we have our communication systems. We'll have 2 constellations around Earth and Mars, as well as 1 PNT, which is position, navigation, and timing, basically GPS, satellite around Mars, and we'll need ground systems for both. We took technical data from the IDA, and that was on current existing constellations, averaged out to our needs, and then we plugged that into a satellite CER, also from the IDA, and we were able to get our cost data from there. Our WBS 3 and 4 are life support and ISRU, which again stands for in situ resource utilization, or like a materials processing plant. In total, that came to just under $20 billion, and it is a little under 7% of our program total. Our life support system, WBS Element 2, consists of air management, water systems, food production, and waste. For air management, we used MOXIE, or NASA's Mars Oxygen In Situ Resource Utilization Experiment. It is approximately $8.56 million per unit, and doing the math to figure out how many units you would need to sustain one person, we were able to scale the MOXIEs up to account for our total population size. All of the cost actuals from that are taken from NASA. Similarly, our water system is also based on the ECLSS on the ISS, just like in the transportation section. That was a cost actual from the ISS because the ECLSS is a very well-known and tested system. So we got to get those inputs straight from NASA and then scale them up to our population needs. Food production and waste are taken from vendor quotes from current terrestrial farms and waste management systems. There's nothing super space specific about that. We just took our quotes from things that exist here on Earth and we adjusted them for the size of our colony. For our ISRU, that consists of 4 parts, a mining unit, as well as thermal processing, chemical processing, and materials processing. Our miners are about $500,000 a unit, and they excavate regolith or soil from Mars to bring to the plant, and then the plant can process it into propellant, oxygen, metal, anything else that we might need. This will enable our nuclear plant construction and long-run supply chain independence. Since there are no actual ISRU plants in space or around, we used an analogy to the GTF Velocis industrial plant, which is a materials processing plant in Mississippi. And that was given a Mars factor of 3 to scale for complexity, living on another planet, transportation to get there, and the size of our colony.
Whoops, sorry, I was muted. This slide details the $15.6 billion cost for our 5th WBS element, crew and human systems. These costs are grounded in decades of real-world data and established space programs, which ensures our financial projections are as credible and data-driven as possible. Specifically, our estimates for training were derived directly from NASA astronaut training protocols and data from Mars analog missions, such as what they're currently doing to test. For medical and biomedical systems and behavioral and psychological systems, we use $1 per square foot that was derived from terrestrial costs and previous ISS mission data. Lastly, spacesuits cost roughly $12 million each, according to the contract currently with Space Axiom for the development of NASA's new generation XEMU spacesuit.
Our 5th WBS element is the operations and sustainment system, which is essentially the system that keeps the Mars colony functioning every day. This section is broken down into maintenance and repair, emergency systems, system improvements, with the largest cost coming from maintenance and repair, emergency systems, and system improvements. Starting at the top of maintenance and repair, this includes the cost of preventive maintenance, corrective maintenance, and spare parts and consumables. These costs are driven by analogous systems like the International Space Station and is scaled to the size of the Mars colony. Moving on to supply chain integration and logistics, we estimate it to be approximately 40% of total maintenance costs, and that is also supported by estimates from the NASA International Space Station O&S costs. Next, we have emergency systems. This includes emergency detection systems, evacuation systems, and emergency communication systems, with antennas and personal transceivers being the primary source of communication. This section is also derived from NASA International Space Station historical costs and is also scaled to the size of the Mars colony. Lastly, we have system improvements. This includes hardware modifications and software maintenance and cybersecurity. And this is also driven by International Space Station hardware and software maintenance costs. On this slide, we have the 7th element of our WBS, which is the science and technology system. This is divided into 2 sections, the scientific research and machines. Starting at the top, costs for scientific research are broken down into lab equipment and Mars-rated field instruments, and we're estimating using analogous systems used on past Mars missions. Costs for machines are broken down into vehicles, drones, robots, data systems, and manufacturing tools. These costs were estimated using analogous space missions, current autonomous technology, and commercial advanced manufacturing systems. Lastly, the last element of our WBS is the program integration system, which is responsible for coordinating the long-term management, safety, and expansion of the Mars colony. Starting with safety and insurance at the top, this category focuses on mission risk management and astronaut safety. Since Mars is a high-risk environment, safety systems must be designed to protect both the crew and colony infrastructure. This estimate was used, this estimate was derived from an analogous contract from NASA. Next, we have verification and validation. This assesses whether software associated with science and space flight activities will meet cost, schedule, and safety requirements, and is also supported by NASA ONS costs. Finally, expansion planning focuses on the future growth of the colony. This includes planning for additional habitats, infrastructure, transportation systems, and resource management as the population grows over time. Next, we'll touch on total costs. This slide here shows the yearly cost distribution of the Mars colony program across different systems starting in Mars year 234 through 244. The total projected cost across the mission lifecycle is approximately $292 billion, and the largest cost contributor is the ONS system, which represents the long-term cost of maintaining and operating the Mars infrastructure over time. The second largest category is surface habitat infrastructure, followed by program integration systems, crew and human systems, and transportation system. If we look across the yearly breakdown, we can see that costs fluctuate depending on mission phases and operational demand. The high cost in year 234 is due to large upfront investment, while the increase in cost starting in year 237 is due to more humans arriving on Mars. This slide compares the total system cost against projected population growth over time. The line in the middle represents population growth over time, shown on the right axis. Looking at the bars, the largest contributor throughout most of the years is ONS system, highlighted in purple. This indicates that maintaining long-term operations and supporting human life on Mars becomes the dominant expense as the colony grows. And as the population increases, especially between March year 237 and 243, the overall system cost also rises noticeably. This shows a strong relationship between population growth and increasing operational demand. Here we have the capital expenditures versus sustainment slide. Capital expenditure, or CapEx, is the money spent to acquire, upgrade, or maintain physical long-term assets. In our system, this would include transportation, surface habitat infrastructure, environmental and life support, ISRU system, and science and technology. It shows capital expenditure costs decreasing in the later years as the system matures, while sustainment cost increases as more humans start arriving. In our system, sustainment costs would include operations and sustainment, crew and human systems, and program integration. Next, we'll touch on risk and uncertainty. Our key uncertainties are broken down into 5 categories. The first 2, birth rate and death rate, are expected to be highly unpredictable in the early stages. We expect birth rate to range between 5 and 15%, and death rate to be between 5 and 25%. Emergency systems on Mars is an important uncertainty due to uncertainties in system effectiveness, environmental challenges, and response times. Launch frequency is another uncertainty, as it occurs every 26 months when Mars and Earth are at optimal alignment. But if unexpected issues or adverse weather conditions arise, it may delay the launch window and lead to schedule overruns. And lastly, nuclear power system reliability introduces uncertainty in long-term settlement operations due to reactor lifespan, maintenance demands, shielding requirements, and potential failures. And any delays in deployment could impact settlement growth in ISRU systems. Here we have the triangle distribution on population. We are including this because these 2 key uncertainties impact every cost driver in the model, meaning any changes in the birth rate and death rate distributions will impact the system total cost. We estimate the most likely population of the colony combining the birth rate of 50 and the death rate of 75 to be 480, and the maximum population to be 550 with a maximum birth rate of 75 and a death rate of 125. This slide here shows an S-curve based on 2000 risk iterations. The green curve represents the cumulative probability distribution, and as we move from left to right, the total projected cost increases. The blue marker on the left represents the point estimate, which is our baseline expected value before accounting for uncertainty. The purple marker represents the 50% probability level, meaning there's a 50% chance that total cost will fall below $274 billion. The orange marker shows the mean outcome, which reflects the average result across all risk iterations. And finally, the dark green marker represents 80% confidence level that is being used in our estimate, meaning there is an 80% probability the total will cost below $292 billion. This slide here shows a tornado chart at 10% and 90% probability levels. This chart helps identify which variables have the greatest impact on total program cost by comparing low and high probability scenarios. The green bars represent lower cost outcomes at 10% probability, and the red bars represent higher outcomes at 90% probability. From the graph, we can derive that emergency detection systems has the largest impact on overall cost variability, making the most sensitive cost driver in the system. And that is followed by efficiency rate, evacuation systems, maintenance factor, preventive maintenance, and so on.
So where do we go next? Hopefully not another planet, because it's expensive, but if we could do this again, ideally we would have a lot more time. We were given 3 weeks to take on this entire project. And obviously space exploration is a big thing, and building a cost estimate is. Communication, we were working across 4 different states and multiple time zones, and we were also working full-time in our regular jobs and doing this on top. So that made it a little bit more difficult. And lastly, a lot of the reliable cost data is limited for these commercial or experimental systems. SpaceX cost data is not publicly available, and so we were having to do a lot of data manipulation due to this limited public information. As most people do these days, we also applied AI. We mostly used it in the early stages for some supporting early WS outlining and brainstorming. We use it for some research support and helping us figure out some rates. But mostly we just used it for visuals and presentation support, because as defense cost analysts, we don't have access to AI all the time. And so had to use a lot of our own brains. This is our hours by activity that we worked. Again, we were given about 4 weeks to complete this entire project. This is our resources list. Thank you for listening.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. This has been another really fun presentation, and thank you for sharing it with us, because we definitely try. We know how nerve-wracking it can be for you competitors to be live in front of our judges. So in the interest of calming nerves, we don't invite everybody. So we're really grateful that you give the rest of the attendees and the membership a chance to see all the work you've done here. We got a question in on the chat that says, let's say this Mars mission is super popular and more people want to go. Could you send 600 or 800 people to the colony, and what would that look like?
Yeah, obviously one of the parts of the prompt was that this would be a self-sustaining settlement that was able to be continued past our timeline. And so we figure out the systems with what it could be if there were more people to come or more people born on there. Obviously, it would be a cost upper, and we would see cost impacts from more people going there or being born. But ultimately, our settlement would be able to sustain it with some extra launches or resources.
And we're not using up all of the weight we have available to launch to Mars, so we could probably fit a good amount more people on these missions and a good amount more supplies without having to add any extra launches. Yeah, this is our weight use per launch window pretty much, and we have a pretty good excess. If we wanted to get to 600 to 800, maybe we'd have to add in one more human transport ship, and then I'm sure we could fit the excess cargo we need on what's still available.
Awesome. All right. So anybody in the audience who wants to send a question, please do so in the chat, but I'm going to ask mine. And I think I've asked this of the last group. What was the data source that surprised you the most? Like, was there a place that you looked for information that you wouldn't have expected to get so much good value from?
I personally was surprised by how much NASA has available, and it was also just a really cool experience to be able to look through their database and see what they have publicly available, and then just learn a lot about what NASA does and what they've done in the past, and so that was cool.
I had a pretty hard time finding good data for SpaceX because they don't really release much outside of what they're just Elon Musk is claiming on Twitter. So I had to use a third-party estimate that was blocked by a paywall, but luckily someone posted it like all their findings on another website, which I wouldn't use in an official cost estimate, of course, but I thought that was a weird way to get around all of this.
I love it. All right. I will move on to the next question, unless anybody else wants to jump in. The next question is the expectation that the colony would eventually be self-sustaining regarding resources and costs that come from Earth?
Yes. The expectation is that the colony would be self-sustaining eventually. Jeff, can you go down and maybe check out the food slide? So there are two big things that humans need to live. We need oxygen, and we need food and water. And the oxygen and water will eventually all end up being produced by our ISRU system, which is operational on Mars. The food will be produced via aquaponic farms that we ship from Earth. So if the population were to grow, we might have to ship more farming materials, but we will be growing our food on Mars. We will be growing it with fish. Aquaponic farming is a version of farming that uses basically fish tank water to water all the plants, and that also acts as a fertilizer for the plants. They absorb the fish waste, and so it creates a really good self-sustaining system. So our people will have food on Mars, produced on Mars, not shipped from Earth. They will also have water produced on Mars from the ice and the ISRU plant, and they will have oxygen. So yes, we could be fully sustainable and sufficient from Earth.
All right. Then another question we got is, how much information did you get from using AI, and which systems did you use?
So all of us work full-time in government spaces, and so our only option there is GenAI.mil, which is Gemini. But like I said, because we were working in our government spaces on top of our work, we honestly didn't really use that much AI. I think that we first used it to help us kind of figure out a baseline for a WBS element or breakdown, and then ultimately at the very end we used it for that visuals and presentation support, and maybe in between on our own personal computers and time we would be doing some other research and rate support. But mostly due to just the nature of our work, we were not really able to use a lot of AI.
Awesome. Wow, keep them coming, gang in the audience. I almost said chat, but oh gosh. All right. Next question is, were there redundancies built into your estimate to account for items coming from Earth that may have been damaged or otherwise inoperable when they were installed on Mars?
Yes.
We talked about that a little with assuming that manufacturing systems like 3D printers would be very advanced by then. And then we did have budget for all of that for any replacement parts or repairs.
Mm-hmm. We also have a lot of our human systems, our life support, our habitats, our crew, medical, etc., have redundancies built into the estimate. Whereas, for example, if one Moxie Air or if one person needs 4 Moxie Air units to survive, then we send them with 5, and I think for that one, the math was at the beginning, everybody gets their own extra. And then as the population scales up and we start to get oxygen from ISRU as well, then it's like every 2 people gets an extra, every 3, and so on. But we did send a lot of extra machinery up, especially in the beginning, because we were accounting for failures.
I also think that we tried really hard to incorporate these redundancies into our individual elements instead of having like a management reserves, because and that mostly kind of reiterates what we do in our everyday work, where we can't present a budget to someone with like a high MR. So instead, we were trying to really bake in that redundancy, which made it a little bit more difficult, but also more fun.
All right, come on, everybody. I'm sure we're going to get one more question. There we go. All right. Any thoughts on bringing medicine from Earth and medicinal research to be done on Mars?
Yeah, Jeff, will you go to slide 73? We have about 60 backup slides, so we're ready for this. Oh, go one more, I think. So yeah, this was that medical and biomedical system research that I brought in. Um, with this is what the preventative healthcare annual cost per person and the emergency healthcare and health monitoring systems cost per person would be, and it includes all of these problems, such as radiation and bone density loss, muscle atrophy, and what it would be included. And this is just research that I found of people who have already, like the NIH, trying to figure out what the problems, the medical issues, and research that needed to be done on Mars, then and then converting it over to what that cost would look like to prevent these problems.
Um, this is so cool. I love it. All right, you guys got another question now. This like never happens. This is awesome. What are the colonists doing while on Mars? Are they working to advance the colony? Will they have the ability to move between Earth and Mars, or are they restricted to Mars once they get there?
I think the colonists are mostly restricted to Mars. Since our launch vehicles and our rockets are reusable, they do circle back from Earth to Mars. So I suppose if extra resources were available and, we didn't use any of our redundancies, you could send somebody back. But generally, they're going to Mars to stay on Mars. Some of them will have jobs like farming or maintenance of the system. But since we have an autonomous system, that is mostly going to be the robots and just probably a couple of humans supervising them. So I think most of our people will be scientists hanging out. It's also based on Jamestown, a colony. So the idea of actually living on Mars is important. Being able to do recreation, build a family, something like that. Anything they want, kind of.
I think also going off of the Jamestown and other space exploration, such as the ISS, everyone has kind of a specific job. In Jamestown, there was one like cobbler and one blacksmith. And so I think it would be kind of a similar thing where they'd be trained in a specific, like there would be specific doctors who have previous medical training on Earth, and there would be scientists that are doing specific research projects that would be sent. But they're also were anticipating this would be self-sustaining. So after they grow up, they're free to do whatever they want.
I mean, is another one gonna come in? That's so impressive. All right, well, I'll stall a minute while in case somebody said there's one more question that wants to come, but it seems like you've really gotten everybody's gears turning. For everybody online, thank you for joining us today. If you're enjoying this and you've got, yes, fantastic work indeed. If you guys are enjoying this and your company has not participated in the challenge before and you've got a handful of juniors that could put up a team, we're going to be doing this again in 2027. It sounds like everybody had a great time who was involved in it. And it's been a fantastic experience all around. So I want to I thank everybody for coming and thank the team from Tecolote. Guys, do you want to say anything else before we go?
Thank you for coming. We enjoyed presenting this. We enjoyed making it. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, this was a really good experience. I feel like I made some lifelong friends. And then also just like appreciated everyone's input from Tecolote and other people who gave us, everyone. We really appreciate it.
Well, I think that's just perfect. So let's call it at that. Everybody, be good to yourselves, be good to each other, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you again for joining us. Take care.